of the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. You remember when it was like week 2 and 3, and I sat there and said, "No, this probably won't go on much longer." Well, I was wrong. This is never going to end. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is going to go on for the rest of our days, and every week I'm going to be doing an update on this blockage. And gotta say, every time I think we're going to get a week and there's going to be nothing to report, there's a shipload of stuff to report. Oh, I get it, blockage now. I get it. I got why you said that. You used that term. We got a lot to report, and we're going to go over it for you. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, so CENTCOM is reporting in their latest, because this is what we get from CENTCOM, our tweets, 78 commercial ships have been redirected as of May 16th, and 4 have been disabled to ensure compliance. I do have a question about the 4. Because we've looked at video and imagery from off the port of Jask, and there's a lot of ships burning off there. And it seems to be maybe you hit more than just 2 ships there. I'm just saying, I just have a question. I mean, it just seems a little bit strange. The other issue that we've seen in the news this week has to do with Karg Island and the fact that no ships have been loading at Karg at all. We get this story from Bloomberg. Iran oil flows most likely cut by spill, according to tanker trackers. Our good buddies at Tanker Trackers are getting the big time here over at Bloomberg. So here are their 3 big takeaways. A pause in Iranian oil shipments from Karg Island is most likely the result of an oil spill in the area, according to tankertrackers.com. The pause has coincided with the U.S. blockade of Iran shipping, but tankertrackers.com co-founder Samir Madani said the spill is the likely cause of the hiatus in loadings. Iran is producing between 2.6 and 2.8 million barrels of oil per day, with storage space available at Karg Island and on unfilled tankers for the oil that Iran pumps. There was a lot of talk, and I did discuss this a bit, that there was a potential for Iran to run out of space. However, Iran can also slow down their production. And again, if you're having this problem in Iran, we're also seeing it in Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar and all the other countries in the Gulf that cannot get their oil out. Let's go ahead over to the Joint Maritime Information Center with their latest bulletin. Now, this one is from May 14th, and you'll notice there's a couple of UK MTO warnings out there. I'm going to go in detail about these during our recap. One of them dealt with a suspicious activity on a vessel taken by unauthorized personnel. We will discuss that because it's an interesting story involving a Chinese vessel. The other one there, 14 May, attack on an Indian-flagged livestock carrier that experienced an explosion and later sank in the vicinity of Lima, Oman. All 14 crew members were recovered by Omani authorities. We don't know exactly what caused this to happen on board the ship. You'll also notice mining in and near the traffic separation scheme remains a threat. We still have the Arabian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, Gulf of Oman, and Arabian Sea at critical levels, with the Somali coast and the Somali basin at severe. All other areas are at moderate. 12 May, we just have a total of 2 transits through the Strait of Hormuz, and on 13 May, 4 transits. What took me as a major surprise, to tell you the truth, was this thing in red. Subsequent JITMIC advisory updates will be released on days when there is a notable change in the Middle East operating environment. I'm not exactly sure why they're not doing. They had already gone from doing them daily to about every 2 days. Now it seems like they're waiting for, I don't know, the ship to hit the fan here before they do another one, which seems kind of strange because I think there is enough going on because we want to track those transits. At the very least, they should be putting out a daily transit number out there because that's really the big ticker that a lot of people are watching. They did put out their monthly statistics for April of 2026, and again, I'll have this link to all, in the show notes down below so you can take a look at it. Very much they're following the categories we saw in the daily reports there for critical areas in the Arabian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, with severe due to the piracy threat. In their executive summary, they highlight the incidents that took place in April of 2026, a total of 36 incidents, vast majority up in and around the Strait of Hormuz, but you also see that little cluster there off the Horn of Africa. That is that resurgence in piracy that we have discussed. Graphically, you see the massive drop that occurred with the Strait of Hormuz, dropping there below even the Bab el-Mandab, the BAM, cheers, and the Suez Canal, with the Cape of Good Hope being really the great beneficiary of everything. We're seeing more trade go around South Africa than really anywhere else. You got your heat map of incidents on the left, total incidents since November of 2023. That is when the Houthis started their attacks. And then the total incidents since 28 February. That is when US and Israel started their bombing campaign against Iran. You also have a month-by-month comparison chart here showing you all the incidents so you can see when everything ticked up in the Persian Gulf back in March and into April. We've had nothing really from the Houthis since September of last year. The Houthis have been amazingly quiet. We keep hearing rumors that they're going to do something. The only indication we had from the Houthis so far was a missile strike against Israel. JITMIC has all the data on the ships attacked by the Houthis. This goes all the way back to the very beginning, including the most recent attacks off the coast of Somalia. They're doing the same thing with categorizing the attacks on ships off the coast of Iran. Although I will say this, JITMIC, the most recent ships, you're withholding names. I'm not exactly sure why this has been the new trend here, not to name names. We know the names of the ships. I mean, it's not unknown. You can go ahead and put them in. It says name withheld until further notice. Not exactly sure what that notice is you're waiting for. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. But anyway, that's your quick kind of recap here on Sunday, May 16th. Let's go ahead and do the recap for the past week. So we'll start with that first story on May 10th. The first Qatar LNG shipment moves through Hormuz since the war started. The El Kahar Tayet, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, loaded at Ras Laffan export plant earlier this month and exited the strait and is in the Gulf of Oman. Now, the ship is a 17-year-old LNG carrier flagged in the Marshall Islands. Here's the ship's track on marine traffic. It looks like she came through the toll booth here just south of Larak Island and proceeded onward and is sitting now in Pakistan where the shipment is being offloaded. So this is of particular note because Qatar had not been able to get a load of LNG out at all. This is the very first one that comes out since February of 28. Trump says Iran's response to U.S. peace proposal is unacceptable. So we have been back and forth with U.S. and Iran having any sort of terms that are going to work. Iran is making a play for the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. They obviously want control and oversight over it. Plus, the U.S. is making demands about nuclear material that Iran has. And what we're seeing is a deadlock here. We're unable to get anywhere forward regarding whether or not we will get a peace treaty worked out between these two, and more importantly, get the Strait of Hormuz open and end the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. Russia-linked LNG carrier Mercury loads at Arctic hub, expanding shadow fleet capacity. The Mercury is a 20-year-old Korean-built liquefied natural gas carrier. She loaded up in Murmansk, and here you see her on marine traffic heading down off the coast of Ireland, heading down off the coast of Spain. Now, we talked about this the other day. Russia has procured 4 liquefied natural gas carriers. They bought them. And Russian LNG shipments are really interesting right now. Now, Russia has just come back under sanctions. You may remember that the U.S. State Department waived the movement of Russian oil and diesel, but that waiver is now over. Now, it may come back again, we don't know, but as of right now, it has been waived. But the other interesting thing is this. Russia is providing a ridiculous amount of liquefied natural gas to Europe. We don't know where Mercury is going. We just did an episode of What the Ship where we looked at the top 5 maritime stories, and one of the recaps we did had to deal with the Arctic Metagas. That is an LNG carrier that right now is sitting here off the coast of Benghazi. This was subjected to, we believe, a Ukrainian uncrewed surface vessel. Well, if you're shipping LNG, are you going to take Russian LNG back through the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal? I don't know. This ship could be heading maybe around Africa, heading over to Asia. They're not probably taking the Arctic route right now because, again, they have to wait for it to open up. They have to get their icebreakers in. We're not seeing a lot of movement right now. It has to warm up substantially before they can get into the Arctic route. Now, Russia has bought 3 other liquefied natural gas carriers. They're trying to really increase their footprint in terms of shipments, and that's going to be key. If Russia wants to replace that Qatari LNG, they've got to have the ships to be able to move it. The problem is a lot of the places they're going to have to move it to, like Asia, is a good distance away. If they have to go around Africa because of attacks in the Mediterranean, then that's going to add distance, ton miles, and they're going to need more tonnage, more ships. The shortcut for them is the northern sea route. That's that Arctic route, but you got to wait for it to open up when it de-ices. This has been a rough winter up there, and we know that it's been, they were running pretty hard up there until the last minute this year. A second Qatar LNG tanker heads out through Hormuz to Pakistan as Iran war continues. Now, MISM is a 174,000 cubic meter, 1-year-old liquefied natural gas carrier built in China, flagged in Singapore. And if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, why is Iran allowing Qatar to move this? It's really not so much Qatar as it is Pakistan. All these ships seem to be heading to Pakistan, and this is really key. Pakistan and India have been suffering severely these shortages, and we're getting ready for monsoon season to fire up in the Indian Ocean. Really rough weather comes in, and you need to get these shipments in ahead of time. And so probably behind the scenes what we're seeing is a lot of work being done by the Pakistani and Indian authorities to broker deals to get ships to come through. It looks like the ship came in through that northern route, but it turned off its AIS just as it was coming here toward Larrick Island. You'll see it comes off here. This dotted line shows you where it is. It actually came close, turned around, held in the Persian Gulf, and then turned it back on when it was completely out. We know there are Pakistani and Indian warships because they pop up on AIS every now and then in the Gulf of Oman to pick these ships up and escort them out. So a lot going on regarding India, Pakistan, and Iran here. Now, according to a statement by Aramco, they have ramped up their 1,200-kilometer pipeline. This is that east-west pipeline that runs across Saudi Arabia down here to Yanbu. So it's coming from the oil fields. Normally, you'd be loading here at Ras Tanura, but down here off of Yanbu, you have this huge anchorage of tankers. All these red here are tankers, and they have been able to get that up to 7 million barrels per day. So when you come into Yanbu, you'll see the oil tanks here. There's only so many pier space here, and more importantly, pipelines into loading facilities. And we estimate right now that Yanbu is loading about 4.5 million barrels per day. So yes, 7 million are heading in there. Some of it's being refined, put into storage tanks. Other of it is being loaded onto the tankers. So not yet equating to the 20 to 21 million barrels per day that was coming out of the Persian Gulf, but this is offsetting it a bit. Port of Los Angeles chief says shipping won't normalize without lasting Hormuz stability. So title of this episode is actually Shipping Won't Normalize. This comes from the CEO of the Port of Los Angeles, Gene Soroka. Gene is a fixture on the business channels whenever there's a shipping issue. He was at the forefront during the supply chain crisis. Gene understands shipping probably better than any other human being on the planet, not to mention the fact that he is the best dressed man in shipping, in my opinion. I mean, the dude is always immaculate. But his point here is a very important one. Without stability, we're going to keep seeing these fluctuations. What the Port of Los Angeles is seeing is increased cost in transportation because of fuel surcharges, higher fuel costs. It is having an impact across the entire shipping dimension. Matter of fact, we'll see a report here at the end from the Port of Long Beach, which is butted up against Los Angeles in Southern California. Trump's economic fury targets Iran oil network as U.S. expands pressure coverage. So the United States is playing a full court press here. Sorry for the basketball analogy here, but they're doing a full court press against Iran. They're targeting not just the tankers, but also those who receive the tankers, because there's still a good chunk of Iranian oil afloat out in the eastern, off the coast of East Asia, off the coast of China, and off the coast of Malaysia, somewhere in the range of about 150 million barrels. And so one of the things that they're targeting is those companies that could potentially purchase that oil, and this is a way to get at Iran with not just keeping the Iranian oil bottled up inside the ports of Iran, but also the oil that's already out there. Next, photos appear to show fire aboard an Iranian VLCC disabled by U.S. Navy. So we talked about those attacks. This is Sea Star 3. So Sea Star 3 is off the area of Jask. That is this area right down here. Here you can see Jask, and we believe the ship to be in this bay right here. You're not seeing it on AIS because it does not have its AIS on. This area is just to the east of the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. blockade line is kind of this purple line right here. And so what the U.S. is trying to do is keep ships from coming out and turn ships around from crossing this line into Iran. As I mentioned before, it's interesting. We saw images of several ships on fire or leaking in that area. We know of 2 ships that were struck, according to CENTCOM. And at the very beginning, we talked about 4 ships that were struck. You have those 2. You have the ship, the Hasna, which was off the coast of Oman. And then the other ship was the container ship that has been turned over to Pakistan. So I'm not exactly sure that there hasn't been more strikes, but the U.S. just hasn't admitted to it yet. We get this story: a rocky supertanker pulls back from U.S. Hormuz blockade. So the ship in question is the Agios Phanorius 1, a Malta-flagged supertanker, 300,000 tons, so a very large crude carrier. You can see the track of the vessel here. The ship actually departed from the area around Basra, around Iraq here, and Kuwait, and headed down the Persian Gulf, eventually crossed the Strait of Hormuz. She went dark, although she did pop up for just a minute here in the lane outbound through the Iranian passage, through their toll booth. And then the vessel came down here into the Gulf of Oman, where she is sitting right now. You see the ship made several attempts to kind of head out here. And if we superimpose again the chart here, you'll see this is the boundary line roughly right here where the U.S. is doing their blockade. The ship came across and then was turned back around. So this kind of highlights really the difficult situation a lot of tankers and owners and companies find themselves in. So this is an Iraqi supertanker, loaded oil in Basra, came out through the Iranian Strait, had permission to go out there, but then gets tagged by the United States, and now the ship is basically stuck. Now, the ship was supposedly heading to Pakistan, so again, this brings in multiple dimensions here. Not exactly clear why the U.S. has turned this vessel around. There are reports that ships up in the northern part of the anchorage in the Persian Gulf may be loading some fuel from Iran, so there could be a suspicion that this ship is involved in moving Iranian oil. We get this great story. Bing bing gone. Is Trump underestimating Iran's fast attack craft? So the President of the United States posted this on Truth Social regarding Iranian fast attack boats and Iranian drones, talking about the fact that U.S. drones, in this case what appears to be a Predator, is blowing up a pair of Iranian fast attack boats, and then a Arleigh Burke class destroyer is using its laser to shoot down an aerial drone. This sounds great, and obviously, the U.S. has got some experience blowing up fast boats. They've been doing it in the Caribbean for quite a while with very questionable legality behind it. It's not questionable, it's illegal. It's number one illegal. You can't just be blowing up boats in the Caribbean, especially when you have the Coast Guard stopping other boats through processes that don't involve the destruction of the boats. I mean, it's just, you can't have both, United States. I'm sorry, you got to pick one or the other here. However, one of the big issues here is that the Iranian fast boats are still in force. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about a seizure done by the Iranians. So the Iranian fast boats are very difficult to track because there's so many of them, and there's other traffic in this area, believe it or not. It's not a blank slate. There's always traffic out there. Lasers are great. The problem with lasers, obviously, is dust in that area. The Persian Gulf is notorious for bad weather, and dust will degrade the performance of lasers. Lasers also suck a lot of power from ships. So while President Trump is making a boast here, the question is, how effective is the United States? And the fast attack boats, while they may not be a threat to the U.S. Navy and U.S. military, they are a threat to unarmed civilian commercial ships. And I think that's the issue that's really at play here. The UK leads a 40-nation defense mission to secure the Strait of Hormuz. So this is a big move by the UK and other nations to get a naval force into the Persian Gulf to open this up. I think there's got to be some outside intervention here. This is the only thing that's going to stop the U.S. and the Iranians. There's got to be some sizable force here to come in to start moving. Remember, back during the tanker war, shipping was always moving. We didn't close the Strait of Hormuz for 9 years, from 1980 to 1988. Difference here is this war, started on February 28th and was at full force almost overnight. The tanker war was a gradual escalation. Iran and Pakistan strike Iran transit deals to move oil and LNG through Hormuz. Not unexpected based on the transits we just saw. very expected to see separate nations working out deals with Iran. And this is the danger, is that Iran will use the Strait of Hormuz for its leverage. And that's exactly what's happened. And Iraq and Pakistan are two big ones for them. Iraq has got to get its oil out. However, we saw the ship just get stopped by the U.S., and Pakistan needs this for their economy desperately. U.S. and China agree. No shipping tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. So President Trump and Chairman Xi met in China, and one of the topics had to be about this because of Chinese shipping jammed up in the Persian Gulf. China gets a lot of oil from the Persian Gulf. However, we talked about this in another story, where China has a lot of resiliency. They have a lot of storage, and also they can go to other places to get it. Yes, they get oil from the Persian Gulf because from Iran, and particularly, it's cheap. It's cheap and affordable, but they can go other places to get their oil. But what they don't want to do is be forced to have to pay a toll. China does not like having itself strangled by or held hostage by, this case, Iran. Iran-linked LPG tanker sails past U.S. blockade line. This is starting to seem to be a little bit of a trend here. So in this case, this is a 21-year-old Panamanian-flagged LPG tanker, the Tara Gas, built in Korea. The ship was able to get out of the Persian Gulf. Here we go. Get out of the Persian Gulf. Again, follow that lane, that outbound lane that's being used by Iran. So obviously this ship was able to do it. Came out, obviously ran through the U.S. blockade here, and now is down into India. Now, the ship was singled out because it's got a track record of hauling cargo out of Iran, sanctioned cargo. Under its former name, which is the Gas Global, groups like the United Against Nuclear Iran and some U.S. senators have said that this ship should not be allowed to transit. Obviously, it was allowed. It's not clear that this ship loaded in Iran at all. It looks like it came out of the UAE and set sail. So again, you deal with a very kind of difficult position here on what ships do you grab. So this vessel was able to make the transit out. Africa's farmers brace for food crisis as Hormuz fertilizers flow collapse. I think this story of urea, MAP, and DAP, these fertilizers that come out of the Persian Gulf, is the one that's not being told enough in many ways. Oil is easy to measure, but also what we see is oil is easy also to make up because there's so much of it stored afloat. We're going to talk about that in a story here in a minute. Fertilizer is a much different issue. Fertilizer has got to be able to move, and more importantly, you've got to get fertilizer delivered as it's needed. And what we're seeing right now is it's not, and that's going to involve food production. And obviously, Africa is the one that's going to brace for this. We saw them have to deal with issues with shortages of fertilizer because of Russia-Ukraine in 2022. The Persian Gulf stood up and did that. However, we're still not getting all the fertilizer out of the Black Sea because of renewed fighting on the Black Sea between the Ukrainians and the Russians, because we're not paying enough attention to that struggle. The IEA warns Hormuz crisis could trigger first global oil demand contraction since pandemic. So the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has released their monthly oil market report. Came out on 13 May. They make 5 major findings. First, world oil demand is forecast to contract by 420,000 barrels per day year on year in 2026 to a total of 104 million barrels per day. That's down 1.3 million barrels. Second, global oil supply declined by a further 1.8 million barrels in April to 95.1 million barrels per day, taking total losses since February to 12.8 million barrels per day. Output from Gulf countries affected by the closure of the strait was 14.4 million barrels per day, below pre-war levels. Higher production and exports from the Atlantic Basin provided some relief, but nowhere near what we're missing. Refinery crude throughputs are forecast to plunge by 4.5 million barrels per day in second quarter of 2026 to 78.7 million barrels per day, and by 1.6 million barrels per day to 82.3 for 2026 as a whole, as operators contend with infrastructure damages, export restrictions, and lower feedstock availability. Fourth, global observed oil inventories drew by 129 million barrels in March and a further 117 million barrels in April, according to preliminary data. Continued disruptions to seaborne trade through Hormuz saw on-land stocks drop by 170 million barrels in April, while oil on water rebounded by 53 million barrels. That's also because a lot of oil was stuck. Finally, North Sea Dated traded an unparalleled wide range of almost $50 per barrel in April, with the disruption in the Middle East flows triggering a surge in prices about $16.5 per barrel month on month to an average of $120.36 a barrel. So I want to highlight a couple of key charts here for you. First, world total oil demand for 2026. You can see where it's at. It is up at a huge level, 106 million barrels per day. But what they're worried about, it's going to drop because of the shortage in supply. We're going to see this kind of huge fall take place in demand. This is that demand destruction you're hearing about, the need for oil because of the shortages, because of the blockage in Hormuz. We're going to see a less demand for oil out there. Second chart there, global oil supply off a cliff right there. That's the drop in the global oil supply. Now, this is in millions of barrels per day, going up from about 108 million barrels per day down to about 95 million barrels per day. Same thing, yellow is your global refining throughput. You can see that massive drop there because of the lack of supply. If you don't have product to refine, you're going to be refining less oil. So this is the one I'm always interested in. This is stocks, and it shows you stocks in several ways here. But the key one up here is that 2026. Now, we were at an exceptionally high level of oil. We were storing a lot of it. We had a lot of it on tanks and on ships out there. You have to go back to 2021 when we were coming out of the very beginning phases of COVID, where we had these record kind of storage because everybody wasn't driving. The problem is how fast that line is dropping. That's a really steep curve right there, and it's going to come bashing through our 5-year average pretty quick. This chart shows you oil on water, and again, you see that drop. Now, we're within the 5-year range, so I mean, we were very high with the amount of oil we had on water. But again, that slope of that drop is really the precipitous one. That is the most dangerous. And then the chart over here shows you floating crude, floating product, and how much oil is in transit. And you can see the drop there and the amount of oil in transit. A lot of that oil in transit drop had to deal with the fact that tankers had to relocate. They had to move over to new sources. So that big long line of tankers that were coming to the United States, that's good and bad at the same time, because you're moving and relocating, and you've got longer passages to go. So this is a really big issue here. China-linked supertanker makes rare Strait of Hormuz traffic ahead of Trump-Xi summit. So the Yuan Hua Ho, I'm sorry if I got that wrong, my Mandarin is going to be terrible here. 308,000 ton, very large crude carrier built in China, 11 years old, was able to get out of the Strait of Hormuz, past the United States, and is en route right now to China. So she's carrying over 2 million barrels of crude oil, we believe, from Basra in Iraq. So again, nothing unusual about this except for the fact that China has been able to broker this deal. If we look closely here, the ship came out through that route again, that Iranian route here, just south of Larak Island. This is the route that they have identified as the toll booth. So this is good for China. Obviously, coming into the summit, the U.S. is not going to stop this vessel coming out. Yet, as we're going to talk about here, at the same time that China brokers this deal with Iran, something else happens that's very strange to understand. So we get 2 India-bound LPG tankers coming out too, and again, very similar to what we've seen happening here. We get a second Japanese-linked oil tanker sailing via the Strait of Hormuz. So we've seen India, Pakistan, China, and now Japan building up relations with Iran, Iran building up relations with its Asian neighbors. Admiral Brad Cooper went before Congress, testified that Operation Epic Fury rolled back 40 years of Iranian military investment. I watched Admiral Cooper's testimony, talked about the fact that basically 90% of the Iranian military had been severely degraded. However, there are issues with the Iran having mines in the Strait of Hormuz. So again, further confirmation that mines are in the Strait. U.S. operations are undergoing in the Strait. There was a lot of questioning. I talked about this with Secretary Hegseth in a video about what can the U.S. do to open up the straits. He was asked this repeatedly, but kept deferring to it to close session. And more importantly, he kept deferring it to politicians, basically saying, when I'm ordered to do it, I will do it. But right now, I'm not ordered to do it, and I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to do it. The UAE will double oil export capacity, bypassing Hormuz by 2027. So this is the decision by UAE to double the pipeline capacity coming across the strait so that they can bypass having to have tankers go into the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, they go to Fujairah and offload. They're hoping to have that up by 2027. Obviously, this will be a big priority issue. It'll also be a huge, huge target for Iran. The Panama Canal aims to avoid repeat of 2023 drought crisis as El Nino looms. So Panama Canal is doing record business right now. I mean, ships are jammed up waiting to get through the Panama Canal. What they don't want is low water hindering operations like it did a few years ago. So Panama's doing everything they can to keep that flow going. If we get low water in the Panama Canal, that doesn't just restrict the number of ships, but the size of ships going through. And in the big lane of the Panama Canal that can handle about 10 ships a day, that's where you see those big liquefied natural gas carriers, those big oil tankers are at. If they can't get through, that's a big problem getting that energy over to Asia. Over in the U.S., $13 billion Commonwealth LNG project gets green light in Louisiana. So if someone's doing good in regards to the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, U.S. energy is doing really good. And one of the things we saw with the second Trump administration coming in is green lighting a lot of projects for energy export. And Commonwealth's LNG project is a big one. Iran seizes Chinese-owned floating armory ship near Hormuz. So this is a really strange story. So first off, floating armories. These ships are used to put security detachments on board ships sailing through hazardous areas. I don't think this ship was doing it for passages through the Strait of Hormuz. I think this ship normally was operating in and around the Gulf of Aden for Somali pirates. Very typical, what you would do is ships would meet these vessels. Off these ships would come several personnel with weapons. They would go on board the ships and ride them. Now, they would meet them off Fujairah because you don't want to stop out in the middle of nowhere. So these ships would get their security detachment on board. They would have rifles, semi-automatic weapons, load on board, and then sail through the conflict area. And when they get to the other side, those crews would get off onto another similar vessel. The reason you do that is you can't bring armed personnel into many ports, especially with weapons. So these ships basically are like gatekeepers. You load on board your security detachment, you offload your security detachment. What we don't understand is why Iran went out and grabbed this ship and dragged it into their waters. It makes no sense, especially when Iran was working with China in the movement of oil tankers through the region. It has to do with the with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps not having full coordination with everything. Again, not exactly sure the reason behind this one, but it's going to be an interesting one to see how it resolves. Greek-operated tanker breaks through the Hormuz gridlock. So this is Paralyzed, about 1 million barrel tanker, 17 years old, built in China, Liberian flag. So the ship came into the Gulf of Oman, turned off its transponder, went into the Persian Gulf, we think went up to Basra in Iraq, and then came out dark on AIS, and now is in India. No idea what happened here. We don't know if the ship made an arrangement with the Iranians, if it just ran through. I mean, I don't know. It disappears in the Gulf of Oman, turns off its transponder, comes out a week later. And you got to hand it to the Greeks sometimes. I mean, Greek ship owners just don't give a flying Slovakia about this. They just don't. And so they just, they're just gyros to us in the shipping industry. That's a lot of bad dad jokes right there. I apologize. A lot of Greek jokes. I'm kind of hungry, so I was kind of thinking about dinner. But here you have an example. And again, who knows if other ships are going to follow suit. We saw some Greek ship owners. Again, this comes from their Greek-based manager, Dynacom. They did a batch of these early on, rolling ships through here. We'll have to wait and see. All right, our final story is this. Long Beach cargo drops as Hormuz crisis keeps pressure on supply chain. Here's the companion story out of Long Beach, seeing the same problem with shipping. So a lot going on over the past week. Definitely seeing a movement of ships through the Persian Gulf with this arrangement being made with Iran. If you're Iran, your hand's looking a lot stronger. You've got deals with major nations, including some the U.S. are negotiating with. Pakistan with the ceasefire agreement between Iran and the United States. China, because the U.S. was just there. Obviously, they're brokering deals with Japan, with India. I mean, these are all major players. In the meantime, the U.S. is conducting their blockade, keeping Iranian tankers from moving in and out. The question becomes, does the U.S. start targeting some of these Iranian tankers out on the east coast of Asia, those off Malaysia, those off the coast of China? There's a lot of Iranian tankers that are still out there. Do they start targeting those? Does the U.S. really ramp up their assaults against Iranian shipping, the fast attack boats, the drones, and those ships out in anchor? We don't know, but I have a feeling we're going to be here for week 12 of the Strait of Hormuz blockage. That is a terrible phrase. I really don't like calling it a blockage. It really makes me, as I get older, not a great story to be talking about, but we will. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit that super thanks button down below. You can give it a big thumbs up, or you can head on over to Patreon and become